try and stop me. Another plot to evade the 22nd Amendment and enable Trump to seek a third term has floated up to the surface of the MAGA latrine. The constitutional term limit on presidents, this one goes, is in fact unconstitutional because no other federal office is term limited. I'll go into depth about this in a moment. But Americans, especially displaced Americans in other countries, and people here who are not really paying attention but think they know the Constitution, are not taking any of this seriously. But the 22nd Amendment, said an expatriate to me the other day. I sighed. I said, Trump will try. He has to. He cannot leave office. He will be prosecuted if he leaves office. He will be jailed by somebody if he leaves office. He will die in prison if he leaves office. Trump 2028. The methodology ultimately will be, I'm doing it, try and stop me. Just like everything else. And I might add, he is still talking about it. Trump on Sunday. So many people want me to do it. I have never had requests so strong as that, but it's something that, to the best of my knowledge, you're not allowed to do. But there are many people selling the 2028 hat. But this is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have 4 great years. It's best of my knowledge, not allowed, not something I'm looking to do. The unspoken conclusion of all that is, of course, but if you all really want me to, okay, I guess I'll make the sacrifice. I'll come off the golf course 2 or 3 times a week. But I'm not going to come up with the plot. I'm not going to make it happen. You're going to have to do it. And then I'll pretend I don't want to, but I'll let you convince me. Just to show how easy this is, how easy this evil is, you do not have to be a constitutional scholar to come up with a way for Trump, reluctantly, of course, to evade the Constitution. I mean, it's not just that you don't have to be a constitutional scholar. You don't have to have a 4th grade degree to come up with something. Give the proverbial monkeys enough time and enough typewriters, and they will come up with an idea. No one better fits that analogy than Greg Kelly of Newsmax, a bonehead so dense that he makes Jesse Waters of Fox look like, well, there's so many choices. Greg Kelly makes Jesse Waters of Fox look like he's not Jesse Waters.
That 22nd Amendment about not being able to run for a 3rd term just might be unconstitutional. Nobody else has term limits in the federal government. The court, the Supreme Court, you're there for a lifetime. If you want it, you can stay as long as you like. How about the United States Senate? Those guys run for re-election. There is absolutely no term limits whatsoever. It's a big deal to change the Constitution, but they did it. However, it just might be unconstitutional itself. President Trump, it should be looked at. This is a way the deep state keeps the presidency under their thumb. Only 2 terms. Nobody else in federal government, other than the vice president, I guess, no, I don't know if it applies to the vice president. Anyway, President Trump is not running in 2028, but this looks to me and some constitutional heavyweights. I'm not one. There's something to be done here, and it should be explored.
So there it is. A guy coming off as a kind of rambling moron, just throwing it out there like it just occurred to him, rather than somebody handed this to him and said, read it in that stupid way of yours. Make it seem like it's your idea, the way Trump does it. Oh, I'm not trying to seek a 3rd term, but everybody else wants me to, so I guess I'm going to have to. I don't really know the law. We'll just ask other people, as if he has had less than 400 committees working on this in secret since the first election. There it is, the newest Trump third-term plot. Trump can run for a third term because the Constitution is unconstitutional. And what phrase could better sum up this last decade in terms of the rules and the regulations and the laws and the impermeable boundaries and the guardrails? What could better sum that up than the concept, just expressed by Greg Kelly, that the Constitution is unconstitutional? In the olden times, say something like that on TV. Even on TV like Newsmax, say the Constitution is unconstitutional and you would have been fired before the show was over. Say it now, and instead of getting fired, some Trumpist will instead, start a signal chat or something about your newest outline for their biggest scam ever and their most evil scam ever. There's one other new and frightening development on the eternal Trump plot front. It pertains to the arrest of Judge Dugan and the ominous follow-up from Ducey the Younger of Fox to the White House press secretary, Ms. Caroline Lyer. Ducey asked, "Would you ever arrest a federal judge or even a Supreme Court justice?" And Caroline Leavitt Lyer answered, "I'd refer you to the DOJ for individuals they are looking at," but then concluded, "Anyone who is breaking the law or obstructing federal law enforcement officials is putting themselves at risk of being prosecuted." Absolutely. So, ultimately, that means if Trump does go along with one of these many plots to stay on past 2028, and again, whether he's successful or ruinous or half the country is underwater, it doesn't matter. This is not about us. This is about him keeping his sad ass out of prison. If he tries something and say it gets, just for the sake of process, as far as the Supreme Court and they rule against him, he will arrest them. She just said it, because they will simply put it in terms of obstructing federal law enforcement officials and denying the unique executive authority of the executive, which is how they have read the Constitution, even though the Founding Fathers, many of whom then became president, did not view it that way, viewed it exactly the opposite way. But clearly, they were right when they wrote what they wrote, but wrong in how they applied it. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Remember the 5 main rules of Trump's various plots to get around the Constitution and not leave office alive, and then I'll go through the already extant 3 plots I haven't mentioned yet. Rule 1, he will try this. He has to. He might be stopped. Let's hope so. He might die in office. Another convenient exit route. But he will try this. If he is alive in the year 2029, he will try to stay in office. And he may have begun that in the election of 2028. Main rule number 2, he will try multiple routes. Again, I see at least 4 of them now. I mentioned the Constitution is unconstitutional because there aren't term limits for everybody. One that has just been invented. 3, he will use surrogates to keep his hands clean. The goal to this, above all else other than staying in office, is to make sure that as few people as possible really think he's behind this plot to erase the Constitution. It must be others. He must be responding to the will of the people, even if he's the one who has purchased the will of those people. But he did say in a slip that I bet he never makes again, he did say that he knew that there were methods that would allow him to stay in office past 2 terms that others are, quote, studying. This was a major, major accidental confession. And again, I would not expect him to do it again, no matter how crazy he is. And he's lots of crazy. Mainline rule number 4. His only involvement in this, at least publicly, at least superficially, will be to thank everyone for making this day necessary. And that lawmakers, in other words, his Republican prostitutes, will change things if he's done enough good while in office, meaning if he's made them enough money and gotten them enough power. Why is he doing this? Money and power. Why are they supporting him? Power and money. Are there any other possibilities? Well, there's power money and money power. The fifth main rule to consider here, if nothing else works, he will ultimately turn to a fake emergency to stay in office. I have been questioned if he would do a fake emergency to stop the midterms if it was clear he's going to lose and potentially be impeached and potentially be convicted in the Senate if the midterms by this time next year look so bad that they might lose the Senate and actually get past the threshold to convict him. Well, would he stop the election? Would he go to that degree? Well, he would have to admit to losing in advance, which he would never do, and he would essentially be putting himself at maximum risk for others, for the congressman who would not be elected in that scenario, and he never does that because nobody else actually exists in his mind. But the fake emergency is there, as it was ready to go in the dear departed days of 2021 on January 6th for him and him alone. If you remember that he is the only person in the world down at the base of his feral brain, down there at the bottom of the reptile spine, there is Donald Trump, and the rest of us are just, at our best, extras in his movie. Most of us are just cardboard cutouts, furniture that can be moved around on rollers. Now to the methods. I mentioned that one from Greg Kelly. You can't term limit a president if nobody else is term limited. The oldest of the four methods has now been formalized. Andy Biggs, the Trump whore from Tennessee who sits in Congress, actually introduced a constitutional amendment to twist the meaning of the 22nd Amendment into not a two-term limit, but a two-consecutive term limit. This is the oldest of the arguments. They have been putting this one out since early 2023. The Biggs Amendment reads, the proposed amendment specifies that no person shall be elected to the office of the president, 1, more than 3 times, 2, for any additional term after being elected to 2 consecutive terms, or 3, more than twice after having served as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president. For example, if a president died after serving for 1 year and the vice president became president for the remaining 3 years of the term, that person may subsequently be elected president no more than 2 times. In other words, this would be an amendment that allows Trump to run for a 3rd term, but not Obama or even Bill Clinton. Of course, the idea of doing this by a new amendment to supersede the 22nd Amendment's term limitation is just them playing nice. Somebody somewhere has a sentimental feeling for Hamilton and Jefferson and John Adams and everybody else, the founding fathers. Again, as I said the other day, it was a surprise to me when Trump recognized the name John Adams when he was questioned about John Adams, and we are a country of laws and not men. He knew John Adams because he knew there was a picture of him somewhere on the wall. The headline in the magazine The American Conservative read, Trump 2028. And the subhead read, the 22nd Amendment is an arbitrary restraint on presidents who serve non-consecutive terms and on democracy itself. This is from nearly 2 years ago. The Republicans started, quote, joking and, quote, tweaking the libs and, quote, triggering the left with variations on this idea ever since Trump mused in 2018 that he was owed an additional term, a 3rd term, because during his 1st term, he had been unfairly preoccupied with defending his, criminal acts intended to overthrow the democracy. Then there was that jokey animation of a Trump 2020 campaign sign, followed by a Trump 2024 campaign sign, followed by a Trump 2028 campaign sign, followed by a Trump 2032 campaign sign, and on and on and on until it would have been a 102-year-old Trump running in the year 2048, and nobody was wondering if he'd be dead by then and running from a coffin because all they were doing was trying to own the libs. Except that's not what they're doing. He is going to try. Let me quote the author of that article in the American Conservative. His name is, I swear to Jesus, his name is Peter Tongue-It. Tonguette. Tongue-It. Tongue-It on Trump. Trump by Tongue-It. The quote, Trump's reemergence as the Republican nominee in 2024 is a triumph of democracy. Not only did Trump secure the nomination following his defeat in 2020, a rather incredible feat in and of itself, but did so in spite of every obstacle the mainstream media, the Republican establishment, and the lawfare apparatus have put in his way. Well, you can look at it that way, or you can point out that the leading opponents to his candidacy inside the Republican Party were Ron DeSantis, an idiot, and Nikki Haley, an even bigger idiot. Continuing from Mr. Tongue-It's tonguing of Trump. Trump, however, makes an even more forceful ethical argument against the 22nd Amendment and for its repeal. If a man who once was president returns after a series of years to stand again for the office and prove so popular as to earn a second non-consecutive term, as Trump seems bound to, when they wrote this, to deny him the right to run for a second consecutive term cuts against basic fair play, unquote. Ah, the familiar no fair constitutional argument. I think that was Alexander Hamilton who thought that one up, or maybe it was George Hamilton. Quote, if by 2028 voters feel Trump has done a poor job, they can pick another candidate. But if they feel he has delivered on his promises, why should they be denied the freedom to choose him once more? You see where this is going. Trump overcame obstacles, or if you prefer, Trump overcame mediocrity, and he weaponized stupidity and hatred on his own behalf. Therefore, the Constitution doesn't apply to him. Especially them pesky term limits in that 22nd Amendment. Republican primary voters chose him, writes the American Conservative, because they damn well felt like it. And they count. If you want to choose Obama or Bill Clinton, you can't. Because, write something fast, write something why they can't. The 22nd Amendment, 2 full terms, or 1.5 if you're serving out another president's term, quote, sounds reasonable enough, especially in light of FDR's hold on the office. Yet those who supported the amendment more than 70 years ago could not have foreseen the prospect of a one-term president who lost the office but who later regained it in a subsequent election. The author then immediately turns to that time that exact thing happened. Grover Cleveland, all the way back in 1892. No one could have ever seen this happening, except I'm going to mention that it already had happened when they passed this amendment. The author leaves out, that's Mr. Tongue-It, that while he may see this as something from prehistory, Grover Cleveland that is, when dinosaurs still had the vote or something, the 22nd Amendment is surprisingly modern, and yet it reaches back into our past so far that when it was introduced, it was by a Michigan congressman named Earl Michener. And Earl Michener, when he was 16 years old and preparing to go to University of Michigan Law School, Grover Cleveland was elected President of the United States. The guy who wrote the 22nd Amendment was already an adult or a near adult during Grover Cleveland's non-consecutive terms. So in Congressman Michener's lifetime, he had not only seen Cleveland reelected after 4 years in the wilderness as an ex-president regaining the office 4 years later, but he'd also seen former President Theodore Roosevelt, 1 3/4 terms, try for a third non-consecutive term in 1912. And he'd seen the Republican bid to draft the former President Calvin Coolidge to run for a third non-consecutive term instead of President Hoover in 1932. And he had seen the former President Hoover try for a nomination for a second non-consecutive term in 1936 and again in 1940. Oh, and he Michener, the author of the 22nd Amendment, had seen Franklin Roosevelt run for a third term and get it, and run for a fourth term and then get it. And he had seen William Jennings Bryan get the Democratic nomination in 1896 and 1900, and having not had enough, run for it again in 1908 and began to try for a fourth time at it in 1912. Michener, the congressman behind presidential term limits, only saw all of that unfold in one lifetime, but nobody, according to Mr. Tongue-It, could have seen Trump serving 2 non-consecutive terms. Nobody except the guy who wrote the rule against 3 terms if you're non-consecutive, or any other kind of president. Once again, if they do this wrong, it would not apply just to Trump. Suddenly, Barack Obama, who will be 67 in the year 2028, and Bill Clinton, who is still and would presumably still be 2 months younger than Trump, they would be eligible to run for their own third terms. Not so fast. What the Trumpists are setting up in this scenario is a Supreme Court ruling that only presidents who've served 2 non-consecutive terms can seek a third, as if that made any possible difference. Lisa Needham at the site Public Notice connects the final dots here in case you think this is just some guy named Tongue-It with the kind of life you must have had if your name was Tongue-It, expressing the frustrations of his impossible existence by writing this bullshit. It's not. He wrote it in the American Conservative, which, as Lisa Needham notes, is a, quote, partner, unquote, of Project 2025. So that's plot 1. Plot 2, from Joel A. Reddy of the Cornerstone Law Firm and his site, which also features pieces on security deposit laws in Pennsylvania and courtroom movies to watch this spring, thinks you don't have to have an amendment or any alteration of the 22nd Amendment because, quote, the 22nd Amendment doesn't say what you think it says. This piece offers not only ways to ignore the 22nd Amendment, like it doesn't say you can't serve a third term, it only says you can't be elected to a third term, but it provides additional workarounds, like electing an entirely different Republican ticket in 2028 and making Trump Speaker of the House, and then getting the new electees to both resign immediately, which would make Speaker of the House Trump president, without violating the Constitution. Plot 3, and the purists here will say this is actually just plot 2A. I like to think of it as a third separate plot because it's important to remember that as stupid as all this sounds, this is deadly serious. This is the end of democracy in its embryonic stage, in its fetal heartbeat stage, in its personhood stage. One of these infants in the womb will come out like Rosemary's Baby. Plot number 3, the 1-minute presidency of J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance runs with some clown as his vice president, somebody who pays enough money. I mean, pick them. Your choice here. My favorite would be Mike Lindell. The ticket, Vance and Lindell, gets elected, and the Republicans retain the Senate and the House in 2028, and the Vance inaugural address on January 2029 consists of, my fellow Americans, Vice President Lindell has resigned. I hereby advise the House and Senate I am nominating as the new Vice President Donald J. Trump. The Senate and the House convene, same day maybe, because this wasn't planned in advance. And they each approve Trump as vice president, whereupon, the moment that's signed, sealed, and delivered, Vance resigns as president. Trump accedes to the presidency, having never been elected. And, of course, we could never actually have this happen in real life. We could never have a president who wasn't at least elected vice president. Oh, right, Gerald Ford. That's right. Now, there is a problem with this one. The last sentence of the 12th Amendment is about the Electoral College, and the 12th's last sentence reads, quote, "No person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of vice president of the United States." Well, they are already looking at that in the phony baloney argument from the fascists. Here is that phrase, constitutionally ineligible. The word constitutionally. They say that covers only the presidential eligibility terms in the Constitution, not the logical ones. And those terms are natural-born citizen, at least 35 years old, resident for at least 14 years. And what's even better from their perspective is they are quoting an NYU law professor who pointed all this out, that the terms ineligible, constitutionally ineligible, only mean those three things: citizenship, age, residency. The guy who pointed this out did so in the year 2003 because he was trying to get a former president to run for vice president. And that former president he wanted to be the vice president was Bill Clinton. The fourth one I've mentioned, the new one, up is down, left is right, fiction is truth. The Constitution is itself unconstitutional. I'm sorry I've enjoyed parts of this. There is something to be said in unraveling how they have packaged this, how they have gotten around America to create new America. They have not been stopped. This has been going since 2015 with varying degrees of success. But this is the ultimate test, and they are bound to try it. In Trump's case, to literally die trying if need be. I will again quote Tim Snyder, and I have been quoting him so long that he used to be at Yale, and now he's at the University of Toronto because he got out while the getting out was good. Quote, Trump is the classic dictatorial position. He needs to die in bed, holding all executive power to stay out of prison. This means that he will do whatever he can to gain power, and once in power, will do all that he can to never let it go. This is a basic incentive structure which underlies everything else. It is entirely inconsistent with democracy. So if somebody tells you the fascists are joking about Trump in 2028, or if somebody tells you, or if you believe the 22nd Amendment flat out precludes this, what are you all talking about? Just remember, the only one on the far right, the only one of the undead pretending to not be doing this right now, pretending to not be trying to get Trump a third term, or we don't even know what their reasons would be for further terms thereafter. The only one pretending to not be doing this, the only one pretending not to be in on the plot, the greatest crime in American history, the only one pretending not to be involved is Trump itself. And Trump itself denying this is an essential ingredient to the plot. Trump here is Julius Caesar refusing the crown, or Richard III refusing office. And remember what Tim Snyder says, and remember what I say, and God help you, remember what Greg Kelly says. And remember this above all else: the Trump political baseline mantra is the Hitler political baseline mantra, is the Mao political baseline mantra, is the Pol Pot political baseline mantra. Quote, I'm going to do it. Try and stop me. The bad news among Thursday's headlines is Trump's Nosferatu Stephen Miller is still trying to ignore and bypass the courts. The good news is Miller is clearly too scared to just go ahead and do it. He is trying to create bullshit, legit sounding reasons to allow him to bypass the courts and yet not go to prison for contempt as a result. The government has now invoked the state secrets privilege in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia abduction case. It is crap, but they've invoked it anyway. And Judge Zinnes has only given them until Monday to file 25 pages or less on what the F they think they are doing, and only until a week from tomorrow to prepare for an in-person hearing about what the F they are doing. Clearly, since the most they've actually been able to dig up on this wrongly renditioned man that their own DOJ admitted was wrongly renditioned, so they fired the guy who admitted he was wrongly renditioned, was the possibility that he was a driver for undocumented workers going from one state to another. There is no chance there are any state secrets involved in this case. And the point of this is the point of all Trump's court cases: to stall, to fill up the calendar with hearing after hearing and then appeal after appeal, so they can run out the clock, presumably both on the orders to return Abrego Garcia and all the possible contempt charges piling up against Stephen Miller and the leaders at ICE, and hopefully that witch Kristi Noem, now with 8 new action dress-up outfits. As usual, when faced with the 6-foot-thick walls of the actual remaining laws and actual remaining American principles, Trump and his minion, and especially this Eichmann-level nerd monster Miller, are simply stepping on the gas and headed right for the walls. They have not only installed these new hurdles in the Abrego Garcia case, but they are now kidnapping and renditioning immigrants to Libya, or at least they want to a hellhole of a prison in a country, in a state of full-on civil war. They are basically sending people who, if nothing else, have a right to due process into a dangerous prison inside a dangerous country where there is every chance they can get killed inside the prison or outside the prison. They also apparently wanted to send other people they have kidnapped off our streets to Ukraine. This, while the memo is out confirming reporting that America's intelligence agencies, now run by Trumpists, had concluded that the entire excuse for all of this, from Kilmar Garcia through the Libya airliners, is crap. That there is no basis for President Scrooge McDuck to invoke the Alien Enemies Act because of the Venezuelan-based gang Tren de Aragua, which must really piss Trump off because he had just managed to somehow learn to say Tren de Aragua. The intel community's conclusion: the Venezuelan government does not control that gang, and the country's dictator Maduro also does not control that gang. Thus, any gang members here are not part of some kind of invasion, and thus they are not subject to the Alien Enemies Act. Thus, if the laws and the courts still have any purpose or influence here, Trump has to bring them all back and either let them go or give them the same hearings they would have gotten under Biden and every preceding president. This also raises the stakes for Miller and increases the chances that Judge Zinnes or Judge Boasberg in the other case may actually take the step of putting one of these bastards behind bars, at least briefly, for their continuing and now escalating contempt of court. Before the memo confirming all this was declassified and released, the New York Times reported the conclusions in the memo in March, and Trump's response, naturally, was to threaten prosecution not of Stephen Miller, nor of Tom Homan, nor of Kristi Noem, but of those who leaked it and those who printed it. Miller, Homan, Noem, and of course Trump are un-American bastards, and if we do not stop them now, we will soon be deprived of the ability to do so. The only alien enemies here right now are the members and supporters of this rogue and immoral Trump dictatorship. Naturally, the Trump response to the whole thing: promote Stephen Miller to National Security Advisor. Hasn't happened yet, expected to within months. Just as the response in Trumpland to his asinine idea of an Anschluss in Canada and something akin to Mussolini invading Ethiopia in Greenland is for Trump to have the brain-dead director of national subpar intelligence, Tulsi Skunk Streak Gabbard, issued what is called a collection emphasis message to the chiefs of the various intel services to ramp up spying on Greenland. Among other things, this will cue a search of both Greenland and Denmark for people there who want Trump to invade Greenland and annex it. Should be a pretty long search, producing a pretty short list. But it underscores we may wake up one morning to find out that overnight Trump has invaded Greenland, and given the knee-jerk reaction of so many in this country who view the world as a video game, I don't know what happens after that. Besides a lot of the same blood and guts, flag-waving, and accusations of disloyalty that followed Bush attacking Iraq. And once again, like Iraq, this invasion would be in the interests of private industry. And no, we didn't go into Iraq for oil. We went into Iraq so we could have a war in Iraq, so we could use in Iraq all the weapons made by the Halliburtons of this country and employ all the Eric Prince mercenaries. Now we would be deploying to Greenland, maybe Denmark, in order to get Elon Musk his rare earths. Donald Trump does not know what rare earths are. He barely knows where Earth is. This is the same Musk for whom Trump is now pressuring countries facing tariffs to adopt Starlink, per the Washington Post, to bribe their way out of tariffs that way. This is the same Musk who reportedly just told a Milken conference that he expects a SpaceX mission to get to Mars next year, and maybe a manned mission to Mars by 2028. Cynics would say it is safe to assume Musk is high as a kite all the time, and he may be high as a kite and be the somewhat perturbed victim of that reported botched penile implant. But even if neither is true, that is exactly the way Elon Musk acts. In any event, this is not the first time. It is of special note that Musk keeps making these Mars predictions, and so far there is not one indication he's taken even the preliminary steps to make any of them come true. He made the next year prediction in March. He made it in December 2020 when he said the unmanned mission would occur within 6 years. In fact, quote, if we get lucky, maybe 4. He made the prediction in September 2016, adding that putting people on Mars, quote, might kind of be in the 10-year range. He also predicted 1 million humans on Mars by 2050, and I'll just note for perspective, 2050 is now only as far ahead as 2000 is behind, and that nowhere did he predict that those 1 million humans on Mars by 2050 would still be alive. Maybe that's Trump's next location for renditioning immigrants. So crazy Musk has already blown through his first prediction. If we're lucky, that would have been December 2024. As it is, he sent nothing to Mars. The fastest possible trip from here to Mars is 7 months in length. More likely it's 8, 9, 10 months. Give him the benefit of the doubt here. The unmanned mission he's talking about must take off by next year, by next May, to get there by 2026. A year from now, it has to take off. Right now, Musk can't launch a Cybertruck that your average American can't peel apart with their bare hands. But yeah, let's attack Greenland so this guy can get some rare earths. And if we're lucky, Trump will think we are going to Greenland to rescue the 70s band Rare Earth, and that they'll perform I Just Want to Celebrate and their cover of Get Ready at the White House while he and Musk dance. Or more correctly, while he and Musk make those spasmodic, embarrassing body movements that is as close as either one of them will ever get to dancing. Meanwhile, Generalissimo Donaldo Trumpo is still nuts. There is a kind of brilliance in the soundbite I am about to play for you. Asked about his blasphemous image in which he depicted himself as Pope, he posted that image himself. He goes, in a matter of seconds, from A, Catholics can't take a joke, to B, there's no problem here with Catholics, it's fake news, to C, I didn't do it, to D, maybe it was AI, to E, I know nothing about this, to F, I just saw it for the first time, to G, even though I know nothing about it, and I had nothing to do with it, and I just saw it, I know Melania liked it. This is magnificent in a way. Completely insane, but magnificent.
Some Catholics were not so happy about the image of you looking like the Pope.
Oh, I see. You mean they can't take a joke? You don't mean the Catholics. You mean the fake news media. Not the Catholics loved it. I had nothing to do with it. Somebody made up a picture of me dressed like the Pope, and they put it out on the internet. That's not me that did it. I have no idea where it came from. Maybe it was AI. But I know nothing about it. I just saw it last evening. Actually, my wife thought it was cute. She said, isn't that nice?
It makes your head spin. Of course, Trump's head is already spinning, like in The Exorcist. And Trump confirmed he met with the insurrectionist Henry Theriault with that metrosexual beard, and he told Theriault to thank the January 6th insurrectionists. And then there is the insanity of him wanting to reopen Alcatraz, closed in 1963 because it was no longer viable, which followed by 6 hours, Channel 26, the PBS station in Miami, playing the movie Escape from Alcatraz. And all of a sudden, Trump believes what he sees on PBS? Are there any films about, just to pick a topic at random, presidential suicide? Oh, right, the Salvador Allende documentary. Hey, Channel 26, can you run the Salvador Allende documentary? And he wants 100% tariffs on foreign-made films, and at least technically all films are foreign-made, and John Voight gave him that tariff idea, and Trump doesn't realize John Voight's career peaked when he played Milo Minderbinder in Catch-22 in 1970. The process is always the same. Tell Trump he's great. Tell Trump a lie he wants people to believe, and he will then do whatever you suggest next. Gee, Mr. President, I'm John Voight. You're great. Ever seen the Salvador Allende documentary? And, of course, the likeliest outcome to all of that will be no American-made films get booked in any other country in the world, and theater prices here go up. Like egg prices went up, though he lied and said they went down. And then there was the part about rationing the dolls so your child only gets 3, and his military parade, and the cancer-causing windmills in his mind. Hey, wait a minute. Oh, Nancy! Like the gas that costs $2, like 83% off eggs, never ending or beginning, like a tariff on your legs, like a prison on an island that was closed in 63, like a $90 surcharge on any movie you might see, like rationing the dolls so your child only gets 3, militarily parading, but it's really just for me, like the bullshit that you find in the windmills of Trump's mind. Thank you, Nancy Faust. I have to confess, I'm not exactly sure how I turned into Bernie Sanders while singing that, but there you have it. And by the way, Nancy Faust is returning this Sunday as the organist at the Chicago White Sox game. The job she performed brilliantly for the White Sox for 41 years. Bravo. And incidentally, Nancy Faust immediately becomes the best player on the White Sox. Also of interest here, a Minnesota woman calls a 5-year-old the N-word, and the lunatic right rallies to defend the woman and raises $1 million for her. I don't know what we can do with all these people, except maybe sequester them in Wyoming or somewhere for their own safety. Also, I've seen a ghost. That's next. This is Countdown. Da 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 do do da 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 do da 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 do do da da dee 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 dum da 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 dum. Let's go, take 2.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann, my crazy friend.
Still ahead on this edition of Countdown, I saw a ghost. I mean, really, a ghost. Not only that, but I recognized him immediately, and I knew why he was there with me. And there was our old commercial radio station run by Cornell students in Ithaca, New York. And I knew why he was there. He wanted me to save the station. And on top of everything else, the ghost was laughing at me. Things I promised not to tell about ghosts. Next. First, believe it or not, there's still more new idiots to talk about. The roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute the latest other worst persons in the world. The bronze worse, Shiloh Hendricks. On a playground in Minnesota, this white garbage saw a 5-year-old black child trying to steal from her bag. This is not a good thing. I am not endorsing anybody stealing from anybody's bag. But Shiloh Hendricks did what anybody would do in this situation. Anybody who's a racist scumbag who shares a name with a battle started and lost by the racist Confederate traitors during the Civil War. She called the 5-year-old boy the N-word. When a Somali American man confronted Shiloh Hendricks, she called him the N-word too. There's video, it went viral, and the obvious then happened. Right-wing groups raised $700,000 for her. The goal is $1 million. How? Because as the almost equally clownish Tim Pool, Beanie Baby, the I'm bald and I'm not proud of it guy, how he put it, quote, she's making money. This sends a message to other white people. Stop taking racial abuse. White guilt is largely over. Because in the world of Tim Pool, who is also white garbage, it's the racist woman named Shiloh from Minnesota who's the real victim here because she's so oppressed because she's white. Of course, she blurted out the N-word because in her mind, she's tired of all these N-words who are oppressing her by denying her the right to call them the N-word. I'm going to quote from the Ken Burns Civil War documentary now. Shiloh is a Hebrew word meaning peace. I wonder if anybody's told Shiloh Hendricks that fact, and if so, what she called them, or what she calls Hebrews. The answer to the latter question may be provided by our runner-up, Laura Loomer. Shiloh might use the phrase blood and soil to them Hebrews, as did this Trump whisperer and school shooting denier, the one who has all that plastic melting on her face, Loomer. Loomer, best described as it, is writing about Sri Thanadar, the Indian-American congressman from Michigan, who, as I mentioned the other day, has introduced the 7 articles of impeachment against Trump. It's not enough for Loomer and the others to lash out against the impeachment. They have to attack the congressman, and particularly his ethnicity, and to pretend that their attack, their racism, is actually somebody else's, and they're just giving these unnamed others a platform. Like Trump talking about a third term. I don't want this. They want it. This is Loomer. Quote, they are embarrassed by Sri Thanadar, so maybe he'll get a primary. I don't know. I mean, if he's such a heavy immigrant community, it'd be nice to have an American there, like a real blood and soil American. But if we can't get a real, true blood soil American to represent that district, and it has to be an immigrant, there's got to be at least a patriotic pro-MAGA, pro-Trump patriot immigrant who lives in that country. There's a terrible hypocrisy here on top of all the hate and the stupidity. Laura Loomer identifies as Jewish, and she dropped 2 blood and soil references in that quote. Blood and soil, of course, is not just a Nazi rallying cry. It was one of the first Nazi rallying cries from the 20s to evoke pure blood and Aryans and all those things Loomer thinks Thanador is not. All those things the Nazis and most of today's Trumpers actually believe Loomer is not, but she hasn't found that out about her, quote, friends yet, because she thinks the current 20s are somehow different from the previous 20s. Oh boy, is she in for a surprise. But the winner, the worst. How do you top these racists? Stupidity. Christopher Landau, Deputy Secretary of State, the guy who theoretically is dumber than Marco Rubio. Apparently, even others in the Trump government of the undead realize that the Deputy Secretary of State, Christopher Landau, is a moron. He tweeted this alongside a photo of a thermostat. As Deputy Secretary of State, the number 2 official in our State Department, you'd think I'd at least be free to set the temperature in my own office where I spend some 12 hours a day. Well, you'd be wrong. The thermostat is encased in a locked container so that I have to call someone if it's too hot or cold. Seems like I should be trusted with this awesome responsibility, but I guess I'll have to work my way up to that level. P.S., he adds, I asked the State Department official photographer who was in my office for another event to take this picture because I'm also not allowed to bring a cell phone or camera into my own office. If you want to blame somebody for the lack of trust, for the need to lock up the thermostat, well, you've got to keep the thermostat locked because otherwise Elon Musk will steal it and try to build a rocket out of it or attach it to his car and charge you $12,000 for it. If you want to blame somebody about the cell phone and the camera, Christopher, go talk to Mike Waltz, Pete the Keg Hegseth. Get him on a Signal chat and ask them about this. Or Rubio, your boss. But it's interesting because Landau is a fascinating case. It may be just about him. It's possible that in the other offices, they don't lock up the thermostats. Lock up your thermostats. Landau's in town. He clerked for Clarence Thomas and Scalia, but he went to Harvard, which, as you know, his boss Trump is trying to put out of business. So every day he should go into that office of his and check not his thermostat, but should check whether his bosses hate him that day or love him that day. They must issue a calendar or something, along with instructions on who gets to touch the holy thermostat of Antioch and who, like Chris Landau, does not. Christopher, he runs with Scissors Landau, today's other worst person in the world! To the number 1 story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me and I once saw a ghost. I have never talked about this before, not publicly anyway, but I once saw a ghost. And it wasn't one of these vague things where you're not sure what you're seeing or who you're seeing. I know exactly who the ghost was. I will get to this story, but first, the setup requires a cassette tape I found that dates from February 1977. And the damnedest thing about this cassette tape is, if you're familiar at all with cassette tapes, they used to have little pinholes at the top, little pieces of plastic that you were supposed to break out or break off or punch through after you were done recording on the tape so you could not accidentally record over the tape. And when I found this cassette the other day, these little things that you had to make not intact anymore were still intact. So this tape has survived not only intact since 1977, but it has not been accidentally erased, even though I left it eligible to be accidentally erased every day since February 1977. And it contains, among other things, the voice of the ghost. The setup here is the radio station involved is called WINR in Binghamton, New York. The man you will hear calling himself Tom Daniels is actually named Glenn Cornelius. He called himself Tom Daniels because that's what the jingle package said. And they had a variety of Tom Danielses over the years at WINR in Binghamton. He was our friend Glenn, who worked at WVBR, the Cornell radio station I have mentioned umpteen thousand times on this podcast. He was going to be the program director and tried to become the general manager of the station, and he was my original frenemy. Best friends, helped me out in 1,000 different situations, as I did he, and we once had a fist fight over a girl. He won the girl, and of course, that turned out to be the best thing he ever did for me. But that's another story for another time, as they say. So Glenn is portraying Tom Daniels, and one weekend in the winter of 1977, he brought his friends, me, Peter Schacknow, and Pat Lyons. That's now Patrick J. Lyons, executive foreign desk editor of the New York Times. He brought the three of us down there with him to see a real radio station, and he put Peter and I on the air, Peter doing a newscast and me doing a sportscast. The only part of this, before I play this tape, that requires a setup is the explanation of the vitamin B12 joke. Peter used to introduce me on the newscasts at WVBR, and he used to ask me a trivia question every Tuesday and got so frustrated in my always getting the answers to his trivia questions that he changed the trivia question from a sports trivia question to a question the answer to which was vitamin B12. And I didn't get it. And it became a running joke inside the studios of WVBR for quite a while. That's the setup. And then there is the additional detail that Glenn Cornelius, portraying Tom Daniels on this next tape, was the ghost I saw.
16 minutes after 1 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, which is now February 20th, 1977. My name is Tom Daniels, and I have a question for you. If I was as old as Joe Namath's football number, how old would I be? Well, of course, I would be 12. And on that note, we'll have the sports.
Here's WINR Sports. The Oakland A's have sold relief pitcher Paul Lindblad to the Texas Rangers despite Baseball Commissioner Bowie Kuhn's edict that no such player sales be made without his approval. Oakland owner Charlie Finley, who likes to that jingle very much, never one of Kuhn's best friends, says he'll ignore Kuhn's ruling and may just sell A's pitcher Vida Blue to the Montreal Expos. On the sports scoreboard last night in the NBA, the New York Nets came from behind to beat the New York Knicks 86-85. It was Cleveland 92, Phoenix 88, 23 points and 18 rebounds for Jim Jones. Mac Calvin, signed as a free agent the other day by Denver, led the Nuggets to a 133-124 win over Portland. Some other scores: Washington 105, Detroit 95, Buffalo 103, Seattle 100, and Kansas City 115, Houston 109. In college hoop action, Anthony Roberts poured in 66 points as Oral Roberts beat North Carolina A&T 110-64. Wichita State ruined Marquette coach Al McGuire's last home game, beating the Warriors 75-64. And some other scores: Kentucky 90, LSU 76, Oregon toppling UCLA 55 rather, and it was Michigan 89, Minnesota 70. On the ice last night in the NHL, René Robert scored a late goal to lead Buffalo over Detroit 2-1. The New York Islanders smashed the Rangers by the score of 5-2. Yvan Cournoyer scored 2 goals, including number 400, as Montreal beat Philly 5-2. Rookie Bernie Federko, he has a funny name, scored his second hat trick in only 2 weeks of play as St. Louis toppled Washington 4-1. And Derek Sanderson, back in the NHL with Vancouver, had a goal and an assist tonight as the Canucks beat Atlanta 5-1. Other finals: Pittsburgh and Toronto a 6-6 tie, and Minnesota beat Chicago 6-2. And that's WINR Sports.
So, I will come back to that cassette from February 1977 later on to give you a few more laughs. But now to the little story about how I saw a ghost. And it was Glenn. As I said, frenemies. I think the last conversation we actually had, sometime in the 1980s, was about the fact that I graduated on time, beating odds of probably 5 million to 1, and he did not graduate on time. That was probably an even bet. But nevertheless, at the actual graduation ceremony at Cornell, with me in my cap and gown, drinking champagne at 10 o'clock in the morning with all the other graduates, and just happy to get out by hook or by crook, Glenn looked up towards me and had the forlorn look of sadness that I can't quite describe. And I may have given him a popular 3,000-year-old Anglo-Saxon gesture involving fingers. Later on, in what I think was the last conversation we ever had, he said he deserved that, and I said, yes, you did. On the other hand, I shouldn't have done it. And he said, no, you probably shouldn't have. And that was it. That would have been somewhere in the 80s. Early in 1996, Glenn, who was then 39 years old, died suddenly while he was giving a lecture about radio at Katz Radio in New York. He had a hidden heart defect that could not have been identified, certainly not then, except in the autopsy. It killed him before he hit the floor. And so the rest of us, Pat and Peter and all the rest of us from that era at Cornell, at WVBR, reunited, recreating a film. And as always, when you get to recreate a film, it is not the one you want. It is, in fact, the one you want the least. And it was The Big Chill. And so we said goodbye to Glenn. And I don't think a month has passed, maybe not a week has passed without my thinking of him. And then there was the time I saw him after he died. In 1997, Dan Patrick and I wrote a book about SportsCenter called, surprisingly enough, This is SportsCenter. And simultaneous with its publication, accidentally with its publication, I was invited to come back to Cornell for the first time in 15 years to give the graduation party, the annual graduation party speech at the graduation dinner of the Cornell Daily Sun newspaper, which I had worked for 1 day in 1975 before they said, well, you have to choose between us or the radio station that you also want to work for. And I said, well, that's damn stupid, especially since the Cornell station, the radio station, is just kind of a slight walk up a hill, but the one to the Cornell Daily Sun newspaper is then down a 20-minute hill and then back up a 20-minute hill. I'm going into radio. In any event, they asked me to come up and give a speech, and I arrived by car. I said, send a car for me, and I brought my stuff with me and got into the Cornell hotel and checked in and had some time before my speech that night, and I went over to WVDR, where I had not been to see anybody, not since Glenn's death, in fact, not since 1982. It had been 15 years since I'd been there. Now I had this book. I had just done the Boston Market commercial, which made me a lot of money, and I think it was already out then. I was going to leave ESPN to go somewhere else for even more money, and I was beginning to run into tax problems, and that sounds dull and conceited, but there's a relevance to the story. So I get to the radio station at WVBR, 227 Linden Avenue. It had not been cleaned since my last appearance there in 1982. And probably had not, in fact, been cleaned since my first appearance there in 1975. And I buzzed my way in, and the first person I saw was a man named Phil Shapiro, who was a salesman who had come to WVBR in about 1967 and never left. He managed to make a living, just barely a living, selling time on a nominally college radio station that had advertising. I won't go into the explanation as to why we had advertising. But Phil Shapiro stopped and stared at me. And he said, what are you doing here? He also did the folk show every Sunday night, the folk music live festival show, Bound for Glory, from the law school at Cornell. And he had one of those voices, and he did a lot of commercials, and he just had enough money to get by. And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, I used to work here, remember? He said, no, of course we remember you. What are you doing here now? I said, well, I'm up here to give the speech to the Daily Sun people, and you know, of course I'm going to come over here now. I walked around campus for about 5 minutes, and here I am, just like the old days. He goes, no, why are you here today? And I said, I'm not getting your point. He said, we are holding a board of directors emergency meeting in 1 hour, and we're going to shut the radio station down for the summer. And I said, what? You can't shut the radio station down for the summer. It'll never go back on the air. He said, I know. I said, well, what happened? Well, now we go to the explanation as to what happened. They ran out of money, but they didn't run out of money. The place was still making advertising money, enough to make a profit every year, although we couldn't keep the profit because of the hybrid nature of the radio. You don't care about this part. They had borrowed so much money in the 80s for various capital projects that the debt was killing the radio station, and the only solution they could come up with was to take the radio station off the air for the summer and then bring it back in the fall when the students came back and there were more listeners and therefore more profits to make, or some profits to make, and they had a chance of paying off the debt. And we all knew that if the radio station went off the air, it would never go back on the air. They would sell the license to somebody else, carve up the money, take some sort of AM carrier current radio signal and reduce this factory of broadcasters that everybody that you could think of, whoever went to Cornell and went into broadcasting, went through. They're going to take it off the air. The place that I owed my entire career to. And I sat down and listened to Phil, and he said, let me get the general manager. And they brought out this fella from the class of 98. And we sat down in the business office. And the business office was really just big enough for 4 large desks, and the promotion director had a desk, and I believe the music director may have had a desk, and the program director had a desk over in the other corner. The 4th corner was saved for the copying machine. That's how small a business office it was. That far corner, essentially the upper left-hand corner of this office, had been Glenn's desk. And every time for probably 2 years, even before he was program director of the radio station, when I would go into this office, I would see Glenn on the phone with his feet up, talking to a music rep from Los Angeles, trying to get free radio players of various kinds and performances or records released or tickets to concerts or something, and ultimately to get himself a career in the business, which I admired him for. He was really good at it, and it worked. But I could see him then, and it occurred to me as I sat down, to my surprise, that I could see him now. Not if I looked directly at the corner of what was his desk, but only if I maintained my eye contact with the general manager of the radio station and with Phil Shapiro, who was basically explaining to me, the two of them were, that the radio station was going to go out of business shortly, like 45 minutes from now. And I just happened to wander in for the first time in literally 15 years on the day they were going to vote to take the radio station off the air. So that was Phil Shapiro's question. What are you doing here today? And I said, I don't know. Now I began to understand what I was doing there. Because when I did not look into the corner that had Glenn's desk in it, I could see him quite clearly with his feet up on the phone, and now hanging the phone up, and now putting his feet down and just sort of sitting back in the chair with his hands behind his head, rocking back and forth in that chair and smiling more and more broadly at me. And he was there. And I don't think I've ever told anybody about this, but I could see him. If I snapped over and tried to catch him, he wasn't there. If I looked at the general manager and at Phil Shapiro, he was there. And they began to explain to me the whole history of the 10 or 15-year decline of the finances of WVBR, which apparently was the last radio station in this country to try to go top 40 for some reason in the mid-1980s. And that's where the financial problem, which was not truly a financial problem, if they could get rid of the debt, they'd be making money. I mean, it sounds academic, and for my financial acumen, which is almost nothing, it is kind of academic. But literally, if they could just wipe out this debt, but there was no way to wipe out the debt, they could never get out from under it. And that was what the meeting was about. And the votes were there to shut the radio station down, and there would be no chance it could ever resume. It had to stay on the air during the summer. For, if no other reason, in the summer was when the real training was done. The people who aspired to be professionals in radio stayed in Ithaca, New York for the summer and were on the air 5-6 days a week as disc jockeys, as newscasters, as sportscasters, as salesmen, as running a radio station for 3 months in a small town. I did it for one summer, and it doubled my ability in 3 months. And so everything I had owed to WVBR, and I knew it, and the ghost in the corner knew it too. And now I'm waiting for the punchline to this. How much money they have and how much money they owe and what the debt service is and how much money there is standing between them and the apocalypse of shutting down for the summer. And I'm waiting to hear $500,000, $750,000, even $300,000, something enormous. Remember, at ESPN doing SportsCenter, I never made $300,000, not in the 90s, and I was the highest paid guy doing SportsCenter. They didn't even offer me $500,000 to stay in 1997. They're never going to pay anybody to do SportsCenter for that much money. So I'm listening, and the only thing that occurred to me was, well, maybe I can throw some money at it and we can delay this a couple of weeks, maybe? Because what had happened was, because of the book, which made me some money, and that commercial, when I fell off the cliff, the Boston Market commercial, which I'd made, had made me some money too, my tax guy had told me that I had to find a charitable donation to make to a nonprofit of some sort. And WVBR qualified as a nonprofit because of this Byzantine tax structure and legal status granted by it, the FCC to it in 1939. It had those properties. But what good would it be if they needed $10 million? I had to give away, according to my accountant, about $50,000 or just give it to the IRS. So he said, be on the lookout. You have about a month to make up your mind. And I listened to this nightmare. I listened to Glenn's radio station about to go off the air, and Peter's radio station, and Pat's radio station, and my radio station going off the air because, among other things, I hadn't paid any attention to it for 15 years. And Joyce Brothers worked at that radio station. Not with me. She was some years before. And I listened to this, and in the corner of my eye, in the corner of the office, I could see Glenn. And what I could not understand about this, it made absolute perfect sense to me that Glenn Cornelius's ghost would be in the corner of the business office at WVBR in my first appearance there in 15 years, when I happened somehow to have been driven there in 1 hour shy of the moment that they were going to take the radio station off the air. That I happened to be there that day. I could understand why Glenn's ghost would be standing there or sitting there in the corner staring at me. What I could not understand was why he had a smile on his face. This did not seem to make any sense. That was the part that disturbed me. Not that I could see him, even though he had been dead for more than a year. Not that part. It was that he was smiling at me. That's when I cut to the chase with Phil Shapiro and the general manager of the radio station. I said, how much do you need? And I'm waiting for the answer, $379,000. And the guy goes, well, I haven't checked it today. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, it goes up every day. Oh, my God, why is Glenn laughing at this? It can't possibly be something I can help with. It'll be a drop in the bucket, even if I have to. He said, but I think the last time I looked earlier in the week, it was $49,983.27. Now I saw Glenn's ghost burst into laughter. Silently, of course. I burst into laughter, full volume. I said, say that again. $49,927. And I said, okay, you're not shutting down the radio station on my watch. Can you keep it open until tomorrow morning without any help? Well, I suppose. I said, okay, because here's the deal. My accountant wants me to give away $50,000 in the next month. And I happen to be here an hour before the meeting at which you're going to shut down because you don't have $50,000. So here's what I propose to do. In addition to the fact that I had to pay for the limo to take me up here from New York. And I thought it was going to be one check for the trip up and one check for the trip back. In fact, they demanded the round trip in advance. So when I got out of the car an hour ago, I had to give them a round trip fee on one check. I still have one of my corporate checks back in the hotel. So I have a check, a blank check, and I have a need to give away $50,000, which is slightly more than you need by about $13. So here's what I want. I want you to rename that studio over there where you do most of the music programming from. I need you to rename that after Glenn. And I want a party tomorrow with cake. And I want balloons. And I want this announcement to run just once. You're listening to WVBR FM 93.5, Ithaca, New York, an Olbermann Broadcasting Empire station. You only have to run it once. And they went, what? And Phil Shapiro went white as a sheet. I said, I'm giving you the money you need. How's that? Can you stay open until tomorrow without it? Because I have it back in my room, and I really don't want to go over there and come back again today. I'll come back tomorrow. I mean, I'm not criticizing anybody. None of you are the ones who are responsible for turning this into a top 40 radio station in 1985. That wasn't your fault. It's 1996. Those people are long gone from this radio station. I said, okay, can you just not shut down my station, Glenn's radio station? Can you just stay on the air and stay in business till tomorrow morning? And Phil Shapiro, who I thought was going to faint, and I'm thinking, oh, great, now there'll be two ghosts in this room. Phil went, I think we can handle it. What do you think? And the general manager just looked at me like, oh, thank God. How did you come here today? I went, I looked over in the corner of the room and there was no ghost anymore. And I said, someday I'll explain it to you. The radio station survived. They managed to keep it open till the next day, and then we had a party, and then they put up a plaque that called it the Glenn Cornelius Memorial Studio. And then they got into other problems that really were not their fault, where we had to build them a new studio in about 2010 or so, and there was a little bit more money circulating through my life, so I helped them out there too. And now they operate from a much nicer multimedia facility called the Olbermann Cornelius Studios, which I claim are named after Glenn and after my father, because my father put in such effort to getting me into that place in the first time, and into Cornell in the first place. But obviously it also, the other Olbermann in the equation is me. But it's Olbermann Cornelius rather than Cornelius Olbermann, because as I think Glenn would have agreed with me, the damnedest part of this would have been if somebody someday had thought there was actually somebody named Cornelius Olbermann, so he wouldn't have that, neither he nor I. And so it is now, today, the Olbermann Cornelius Studios. But I saw him laughing his ass off. Something put me in that studio an hour before they were going to go out of business, after not being there for 15 years nor worrying about their financial status. Something put me in that studio having to give away $50,000 for tax purposes when they needed just slightly less than that. I'm happy to say that they spent the additional $13 on the cake. I saw him. Didn't hear him. Didn't ask him questions. Didn't say anything. I saw him. And then the other day I found this cassette.
All right, that's what I like to see. A record that's hop, skipping, and jumping there. All the young dudes, just listen to this, folks. WINR! Wait, that wasn't your cue. Hold it. We're not quite ready yet. Time out. 1, 2, okay. Wait, don't go yet. Well, it's 3.5 minutes before 2 o'clock. We're WINR Binghamton. My name is Tom Daniels, and we're going off the air in a very little while. I'll be back tomorrow morning, maybe, at 10 o'clock, and I'll be here through 4. Dandy Don Morgan in at 4 o'clock. And now, this message. WINR! Well, the world may never recover from from this. I certainly won't ever recover from this. But Al Stewart's going to come, and he's going to sing a song, and this is entertaining. It's a nice song to go to bed to. It's all about the Year of the Cat.
On a morning call.
That's enough. Hurricane, you're not listening. We're going to have to take decisive action here if Hurricane doesn't watch out.
Love me too.
I told you, they weren't nice. Well, the views and opinions expressed by this activity do not particularly reflect the opinions or the views of anyone. Most especially Keith or Peter or Pat or anybody else like that. 13 before 1 o'clock at WINR. That was a little bit of Hurricane Smith. Luckily, not a whole lot, though. Eagles are here.
I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, my accompanist, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend Tony Kornheiser, and everything else was, as ever, my fault. The next countdown for today, day 109 of America held hostage. Just 1,354 days until the scheduled end of his lame duck and lame-brained term, unless Musk removes him sooner, or the actuarial tables do, or we do. The next scheduled countdown is Monday. As always, bulletins as the news warrants. Remember, he is, as you listen to this, laying the groundwork now to not leave office later. Also, I want polling on a presidential recall vote. Won't somebody do polling on a presidential recall vote? Won't somebody think about the polling on a presidential recall vote? Till next time, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck. All right, we're going to try this. The windmills of Trump's mind. Take one. Like the gas that costs $2, like 83% off eggs, never ending or beginning, like a tariff on your legs, like a prison on an island that was closed in '63, like a $90 surcharge on any movie you might see, like rationing the dolls so your child only gets 3, militarily parading, but it's really just for me, like the bullshit that you find in the windmills of Trump's mind. Thank you, Nancy Faust. Why does that sound so echoey?